Shalom, this is Daniel from Netivyah in Jerusalem, as always, except during my period in Europe last month. But anyways, let's get started. One of the biggest and hottest topics right now is the claim that there is starvation in Gaza, along with awful pictures of bony children. Let's break down that claim and try to figure out what's going on. So, starting with some timeline stuff, on July 23rd, 2025, the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, released a statement that Hamas and the UN want the exact same thing, the GHF out of the picture, and the media really ought to stop and ask why. Now, I'll go into the answer a little later, but this was in reply to a post by a woman named Kadi Pavlich, which said the following: "How odd," or actually it said, "odd how the UN won't distribute aid unless Hamas gets a cut," almost as if they've been partners all along. Now, we're going to take that further, but let's go on. On July 24th, the IDF spokesperson facilitated the entry of dozens of foreign journalists into the Gaza side of the Kerem Shalom border crossing to see the hundreds of trucks full of aid sitting there not being distributed because of Hamas and the UN. Do you think that this would change their agenda-based reporting? Let's find out. The following day, on July 25th, Israeli ambassador to Canada, Ido Moed, accuses the UN of blocking aid in Gaza after Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney accused Israel of violating international law due to the starvation claim. He added that the UN has failed to move and distribute aid in Gaza and is discouraging other NGOs from taking action. And he mentioned the nearly 1,000 trucks waiting for distribution that the UN are refusing to distribute. Now, this relates to the multiple reports of trucks sitting there, but there have been additional reports by Israeli media that over 70 trucks full of food, the contents of those trucks have expired inside the Gaza Strip due to the UN being unwilling to distribute the aid. They claim that they are not willing to do so if the IDF is the one securing the trucks. In other words, keeping Hamas from stealing it. It's so crazy. Their lies and their agenda are so obvious to anyone aware of these easy to find reports. And that is why Hamas reporters and the Hamas supporters, who are in fact the world's reporters, have to keep these stories out of the legacy media. So most of you don't even hear this stuff, even though it's very easy to look for. On July 27th, Yosef Haddad, who's an Israeli Arab who served in the military and is now a strong defender of Israel, posted on X that the awful picture of the starving Gazan child which circulated the world virally, Osama Arakav, is actually not starving, but sick with cystic fibrosis. And even more, that Israel approved his and his family's travel to Italy for treatment a month and a half ago. In other words, it is very, very fake and very easy to disprove. Once again, showing us that the media around the world work hand in hand with Hamas and are glad to push the Hamas terrorist propaganda with no concern for the truth. IDF spokesman criticized Israeli media, that is, the legacy mainstream left-wing progressive media, which most of it is such as channels 11, 12, 13, Galei Tzahal, Haaretz, Ynet, and so on, saying that they should not be echoing and amplifying Hamas's propaganda of starvation in Gaza. He says that the general in charge of coordination with the PA and other international agents in Gaza and the West Bank is monitoring the situation daily, that there is food and that sanitation and the medical situation and the nutritional situation are all monitored and more. And if it reaches dangerous points, then the IDF acts to ensure the entry of humanitarian aid according to different indexes and statistics that they have. That there is no starvation in Gaza, even if it's not comfortable, and that it is a false campaign managed by Hamas, and it is a shame that Israeli media cooperate and amplify these false campaigns, which is useful against Israel, against us. It's used against us all the time. It's worth pointing out that what he missed in his statement is that the legacy media and the academia and the judges and the bureaucrats and the left-wing military echelon and all of the progressive, woke, liberal left around the world, but also in Israel, will do anything to harm the current right-wing government of Netanyahu. They will protest and amplify any lie and any agenda as long as it hurts the government. Now, this slightly goes on to in a different direction to the negotiations in Qatar between Israel and Hamas. But it relates to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and in general to the Gaza starvation lie, which is the following story. The Wall Street Journal reported that the number 2 demand by Hamas during the negotiations was to dismantle the GHF and resume the distribution through the UN. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be that the GHF is keeping the aid from getting to Hamas for them to sell? Could it be that the UN works hand in hand with the terrorists? They added in the Wall Street Journal report that the GHF has caused Hamas more fear than anything else in the past 2 years because it takes away their leverage and control of the civilian population. Moving on, July 28th. Education Minister Yoav Kisch wrote a condemnation letter to the university deans, who 5 of them had written a letter to the Prime Minister condemning the hunger in Gaza. By the way, on a side note, I heard from a friend of mine who's in 2 months will be completing his PhD and MD, that as a result of the letter of these deans, different European research communities have decided to stop the cooperation with the universities. And then the deans wrote a letter to the students saying that it's the fault of the starvation in Gaza, which of course it is not. It is the fault of their letter that allows the Europeans a proof, so to speak, that the universities are saying that this is happening, and consequently they can break the partnerships and research ties. So their own stupid act of amplifying lies has caused harm to their own institutes, and then they want to blame others for it. Anyways, they wrote a letter condemning the hunger in Gaza. Now, the education minister, Yoav Kisch, wrote that amplifying this false narrative of hunger is especially harmful considering their esteemed roles in academia. Instead of laying the blame where it belongs with the terrorist organization Hamas, which is holding hostages, committing war crimes, and using its civilian population as human shields, and even robbing the humanitarian aid, they, the deans, chose to join the Hamas propaganda campaign. That there is no Israeli policy meant to starve the Gazan population. On the contrary, Israel is working daily in cooperation with international agents to make sure that humanitarian aid enters the Strip and gets to the hands of the citizens who need it, and not Hamas. Any claim to the contrary is not only a lie, but also aiding and abetting the enemy in wartime. The citizens of Gaza suffer primarily from the murderous terrorists of Hamas. Especially from academic leaders, responsibility and accuracy are expected. Congressman and Speaker of the House Mike Johnson posted that since the war began, Israel has provided 94,000 aid trucks, enough to feed 2 million people for 2 years. Hamas has stolen a huge amount. He said that in 2024, half of Hamas's budget came from the profits from stolen food. $500 million. Whew! Wow, we're on a roll here. The IDF spokesman in Arabic posted on X pictures of the kitchens within the Hamas tunnels under Gaza, showing lots of cooked food, fresh fruits and vegetables, shelves full of food and shelves full of UN aid. Now, one would wonder why Hamas posts such pictures, as it goes against their narrative of starvation. Hamas posts these pictures as recruitment material, since they know that the world's left lean-in media and so on will keep pushing their lies anyway and not publish these types of materials, and thus they are showing the Gazans who are, let's say, nutritionally challenged, that if they join Hamas, they'll have plenty. Moving on. Andrew Fox, a former British Army officer, current research and expert on the Middle East, visited the GHF distribution centers and said that the legacy media, including in Israel, are pushing Hamas lies, and they are lies, and that the reality of the GHF distribution is so far from the lies that the media show that it is scandalous. Moving on to July 29th, Senator Tom Cotton says what should be obvious to all of us. Israel has no responsibility to provide any kind of aid into Gaza. They are repeatedly held to a different standard than the rest of the world. I've said this before, but this would be like expecting the Allies to not bomb Berlin or Dresden or to provide humanitarian aid to Berlin during the war. It's crazy, and it has not happened to anyone else anywhere in the world in human history. But moving on. The IDF released on X footage of armed Hamas terrorists taking control of aid trucks, riding on top of the trucks and shooting from the trucks. July 30th. Finally, after a week of pumping out anti-Semitic lies, the New York Times admitted that the lies they pushed based on their evil agenda, which works hand in hand with Hamas's propaganda about starvation in Gaza, is false. The headlines of a starving child were not a starving child at all, but a sick child. Not the one we mentioned earlier with cystic fibrosis, but another one with cerebral palsy. Something that could have easily been fact-checked, considering it was even noted by the Hamas health services months ago. But they don't care about the truth. They are only pushing the Hamas's lie. Now, this admission was made via their less circulated and less followed editorial note page rather than their main page with millions of followers. Now, just a note that there were pictures available of this same child that the media chose to ignore, of this sick child with his healthy, not starving brother, that would have obviously shown that this child is sick and not starving. But once again, the media chose to ignore this. So then, our question is, why does the media, the left, the politicians, the legacy, the progressives, why do they keep on with this agenda? Well, because Hamas started a war with Israel. Hamas took hostages. Hamas refuses to negotiate, and Israel is blamed. It's always a double standard against Israel. And now, again, as mentioned before, I'm sure it's very uncomfortable to live in Gaza. But Hamas could end the war today if they chose to. Hamas could end the suffering today. Any pressure or demand on Israel to cease the war is ludicrous, as it will leave Hamas in power and will result in another October 7th. Now, that's all we're going to get into for now about the lies of starvation in Gaza. This material is accurate as of early on July 30th, so we'll get updates in future videos. There are a whole bunch of other interesting stories. For example, the Prime Minister of England has said that he will, at the UN General Assembly, also recognize the Palestinian state similar to France, though he did lay a few conditions, but we'll see if any of those come to pass. And there's a few other stories, but we'll talk about them later. So for now, please share this with any person who you think has the heart and mind to understand and to have their opinions changed, because most people are so polarized and so brainwashed that it won't matter. The truth in their face will do nothing. Similar to the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man asked Abraham to send Lazarus to speak to his brothers so that they would not end up in hell. And Abraham told him that they have Moses and the prophets, and even someone coming back from the dead would not convince them if Moses and the prophets would not. So, pray for all the rich men around the world who are currently blinded and are not listening to Moses and the prophets. Pray for Israel, the soldiers, the hostages, and like, subscribe, share, do everything that helps you and helps us communicate. Shalom, and God bless you all.